Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we will be joined by two panelists, Parth and Giovanni, and we're going to be talking about how you can obtain letters of recommendation for med school. Just a little bit about us at Inspira Advantage. We are an academic consultation group committed to helping you get into your dream med school. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in. So our agenda for today, we're going to start off by introducing our panelists. We're then going to talk about letters of recommendation, what they're for, what their purpose is in your application. Then we're going to go over some best practices of what you need to know when it comes to obtaining letters of recommendation. We'll talk about when you should be asking, when you should be sending them in, who you should be asking, and how you should be asking. Then we're going to talk about what makes an impactful letter of recommendation, and then we'll talk about some tips. Yeah, and then at the end, if you do have any questions, you'll see a little Q&A box on your screen. Feel free to type anything out there, and we'll be answering those for you at the end. All right, so we'll start with introductions. We have Parth and Giovanni here with us today. Parth, you can start.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Parth. I grew up in New Jersey, went to med school at Robert Johnson in Central Jersey, and I just graduated last year. So I'm currently a first-year internal medicine resident at Johns Hopkins Bayview in Baltimore.
Thank you so much. And Giovanni.
Hello, my name is Giovanni. Feel free to call me Gio, though. I'm originally from a small town in Ohio. I went to Ohio State for undergrad, and then currently at Northwestern for med school. I'm applying into anesthesia, and I find out tomorrow where I go. So I'm excited to be here.
That's exciting. Thank you so much for your lovely introductions. Happy to have you guys. All right, so we're gonna jump on in. We're gonna talk about letters of recommendation. What are they? What's the point? Y'all take the floor.
Sure. So I can get started. So letters of recommendation are just one component of your application when you apply to med school, and they highlight your achievements both academically and professionally. It's really another tool that admissions officers have to get a picture of who you are as an applicant, and it gives you a little bit of gives them a little bit of contextualization in terms of what makes you a great candidate and how other individuals like professors, mentors, employers, and others have view you and the work that you've accomplished up till this point.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add to that, Giovanni?
Yeah, I agree. It's medical school admissions are becoming more and more holistic. So anything that the admissions committee has that comments on your personality, your character, things that might not be, demonstrated in your stats, for example, is helpful. And letters can come in handy there.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to move on and talk about what you need to know about letters of recommendation. Yep, let's get started. Giovanni, you can take this one.
Yeah, so how many letters of recommendation do you need? Most schools will require at least 3 letters and a committee letter. And a committee letter, if you're a little bit earlier on in the process, some schools offer kind of a committee letter through a more formal, organized way. So definitely look into your own specific undergrad institution. Ensure that you do your research, as some institutions might require something different. So on the medical school side, there may be schools that want 4 letters or want letters from certain professors or from at least one MD. So definitely be doing research and checking all the boxes on your schools and on your letters.
Thank you. Yes, so a bit more on that. I guess this next one, Parth, you can take this, or Giovanni, you can keep continuing if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to send in more letters than are required, double check to ensure that the school you're applying to accepts those additional letters. Some do not accept more than they require, which may affect your application. If the school you wish to apply to has no limit, you can amend up to 6 letters. And I remember there are certain processing programs, so you can kind of add, I remember it was Interfolio, you can add, an abundance of letters and then choose which schools you want to send which letters to. Yeah.
Sounds good. Do you have anything to add to that, Parth?
No, I think that's covered. It can vary a lot from school to school. So just make sure you look at the requirements for the specific schools that you're applying to. And on the whole, if the school offers a committee letter, it'll probably give you the best chances if you're able to get one of those.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So we're going to talk about the different types of letters. You can take this one, Parth.
Sure.
Yeah.
So a couple different types. So I think we touched on a little bit on the pre-medical committee letter. So if your school, not all undergrad schools have them, but if they do, you submit all your letters to a pre-med or pre-health committee, and they sort of compile it and they give their own assessment on terms of what you've accomplished at the school. And they'll give you your support, and it's usually the best option if your school does offer that. A letter packet is essentially just sort of similar, but without the evaluation. So they just put all the letters together for you. And then otherwise, you can submit individual letters from professors, mentors, like we had talked about prior.
So do you have anything to add, Giovanni? Or shall we move on?
I don't think so. I would say the majority of letters will probably be the individual letters that you'll have to actually seek out and acquire.
Yes, perfect. So on that note, we'll talk about who you should be asking for your letters of recommendation.
Yeah, typically medical schools will ask for 2 letters from a science professor and 1 from a non-science professor or supervisor. And if you're a non-traditional applicant, that this certainly might look different, or if you have an extended period of time between your undergraduate graduation and your medical school application. For example, I remember for me, I had, I think, 2 science professors, a research professor, and a Spanish professor. And not to say you need to have those, but I just use that as an example as you kind of want a spattering almost. And you kind of want for people who have seen you in different contexts and in different roles.
Beautiful. Do you have anything to add to that, Parth?
No, I completely agree. I think I had a very similar, thinking back, I think I had a similar mix of professors. I think the only other additional one I might have had was like a work supervisor, but otherwise 2 science, something in the non-sciences, and a research mentor is probably a good mix.
Yes. And then in terms of non-traditional applicants, do you guys have any kind of words of wisdom on how they should go about obtaining letters of recommendation?
I personally, full disclosure, I was not a non-traditional applicant. But I can say that if you have that extended period of time, but you have maintained that relationship, some medical school committees would look at that as a positive, because if you've maintained that relationship, presumably this person knows you better. And I would say just generally, this is a little bit on a tangent, that you want a letter writer that knows you the best, not necessarily with the biggest name or with, it's really just to speak to you. So if there is that, longitudinal relationship, then that might be helpful.
Awesome. And then also just like a question, I guess, on my end, in terms of non-traditional, like if you are a non-traditional student, would you recommend asking for letters of recommendation from supervisors? Do the same rules apply?
So I can say, so I took 2 years off between undergrad and med school. And so I guess it really depends on when you sort of know you want to apply to med school. If you know that you want to apply right after college, but you want to take a little bit of time off, it wouldn't be wrong to ask for a letter and either have your undergrad pre-health office or something like that just hold on to it. Usually, your strongest letter is going to come when someone knows you well, and if you're graduating or you're just taking a professor's class, it's not wrong to ask for them. Just hold on to it when you're like sort of fresh in their mind, and then they could add on that letter when you do decide to apply, whether it's that summer or the year later. And I think and med schools are definitely they definitely appreciate letters from work supervisors. They definitely like work experience. It's not to say that you shouldn't have academic letters, because that's definitely something that you definitely need, but work supervisors are highly regarded for non-traditional applicants who have experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so now that we've talked about who you should be asking for letters of recommendation, we are going to talk about when you should be asking them and how early in advance you can start planning. So you can take this one, Parth.
Sure. So the basic thing is just to ask as early as possible. So usually the general recommendation is like the fall or winter of your junior year if you're going to be applying straight through, because you would be applying the summer after your junior year. So trying to sort of target that time period to ask advisors. But if you're not applying directly out of college, you could do it later in junior year or even early senior year, depending on when you want to apply. But as early as possible to give letter writers enough of an opportunity to write the letter.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add to that, Gio?
No, I think you covered it.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about how you should ask for letters of recommendation, best practices. So you can take this on, Gio.
Yeah, so like that first bullet point says, in this age, I feel like asking for email is the most common way, but definitely better to ask in person. And you asking in person, I kind of look at it as almost a two-step process. You kind of ask in person when it's like more natural or organic, like at the end of the class or like when you're at work, for example. But then you more officially ask in an email with whatever that link to the portal is, if they were certainly going to do it. And once you ask your letter writer, I always say to plan to remind them at least every like 2 weeks, because these people are probably very busy, so kind of keep that in mind. And then add some things to that email, like your personal statement if you have a draft of it, your CV, your resume, your transcripts. And I also say definitely try to meet them in person. And it's better if you give them a printed version of this and talk to them for 10, 15 minutes or even more if you have that type of relationship. Any more information you give them makes their letter writing job much easier.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add, Parth?
No, I agree. I think asking in person is always better, and then following it up with an email with specifics about what it is. And it's always good to, if you can sort of remind them about things that might have happened with your experience with them, if it's like a work supervisor, like a project you might have worked on, or if it's a class, they're probably well aware, but just like a presentation or like something that you might have done, just so it's fresh in their minds.
Perfect. All right. So now that you know when to ask, who to ask, and how to ask, we're going to move on to talk about what makes an impactful letter of recommendation. So let's get started on that. Parth, the floor is yours.
So this is something that I didn't do, but I sort of found out a little bit later in the process that I think it's really important. So the AMC has a guide to writing a letter of evaluation. So that's always important to include for professors or advisors who may not be fully, may not know about the med school application process. But they really want to get an assessment of who you are as an applicant. And they also want to understand the sort of relationship your letter writer has with you, whether it's something that's just started where you've only known them for a few weeks versus if it's been a long-term relationship for months or years. And they want to sort of discuss behaviors and qualities that really reflect the applicant's fit to become a med school student and a future physician, and then sort of unique characteristics that they could bring to a specific medical school.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add, Gio?
I don't think so. Definitely be sure to send this, like Parth said, but also make sure to review it, yourselves as the applicants.
All right. So a bit more on what makes an impactful letter of recommendation. Gio, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So ensure that your letters of recommendation go into a specific detail about your accomplishments and traits. Again, I would say you may not see your letter. You should actually try to opt to not see your letter. But make sure that whoever the person is, can comment on specifically, like Parth mentioned, a specific presentation you made or a specific instance at work. Demonstrate your capability. The letter of recommendation, in addition to your personal statement, just kind of describes your character and your capability, potentially through adversity or potentially just in, a work or school context. And this is why it's important to ask someone who has a knowledge of your capability and has seen you kind of in trying times or adverse times or times when you had to display a lot of work ethic. And then quality over quantity. I think this is especially important. This, I think, kind of goes along with that idea of ask someone who really knows you, even if they may not be like the, big tenured professor, or, or if they have like a, if they don't have as formal of a position, if they know you better, it still speaks to your the other two items on this list. So yeah, and remember, you only need 3 letters plus that committee letter if it's offered.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add to that, Parth?
No, I think that was comprehensive.
Yes. All right. And then we're going to talk about how your letters should be showing some core competencies. Parth, you can take this on.
Sure. So this is sort of a newer development that the AMC has had about sort of core competencies that they'd like to see in entering medical students, and they break it up into 4 categories. So interpersonal competencies, so hitting on service orientation, social skills, cultural competence, teamwork, and then your ability to communicate orally. Science competencies, which is self-explanatory, living systems, as well as human behavior. Intrapersonal competencies, ethical responsibility, reliability, resilience, and then your capacity to improve or adapt. And then your ability to think and critically reason. So critical thinking, reasoning, scientific inquiry, and written communication. So these are core competencies. And what I'd really like to say is you can Google this list, but really you want to have your letter writers try to hit on as many of these competencies as possible. So obviously, one letter doesn't have to hit on all of them, but you want to try to get all of your letters to collectively hit on as much of these as possible to really show that you're a well-rounded applicant.
Awesome. And do you have anything to add to this, Gio?
I don't think so, no.
All right. All right. So we're going to move on to our tips on how you can get the best letters for med school. All right. Gio, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think this is really important, especially for the students who are earlier on in their undergrad career, is networking and building meaningful relationships. Go to office hours, if a professor asks for like a presentation kind of generally to the class. I remember that happened at Ohio State, to, volunteer for those types of things, and just kind of spend time around professors who you might want to, form that relationship with. And also, this can be a double-edged sword. You can have them as a mentor and also as a letter writer. Definitely ask for more letter writers than you need. Definitely also plan to remind them. That goes along with that. And you can store these letters in case you need to reapply, or in case you want to send different letters to different schools. If a letter writer has any hesitation when you ask them in person, Um, I would definitely recommend to think twice about including that letter. Um, the best letter writer response is to just kind of for them to kind of more enthusiastically say yes, and then avoid redundancy. You know, don't get all science professors, don't get all non-science professors. Um, you want to show kind of like what Parth was mentioning. You want to show a comprehensive. You want to show that you have that comprehensive list. So.
Parth, do you have anything to add to this?
Nothing new. I just want to highlight the point that Giovanni made about just sort of gauging the response when you do ask from a letter writer, because it can really it can give you a sort of insight into what type of letter that might be written. So just if they're, like Giovanni said, if they're hesitant or not as forthright or excited about it, don't take it as a knock on you. It's okay. It just means that that person might be too busy or just doesn't have the relationship with you as you might think. So you can obviously accept the letter, but just think twice about including in your application and then try to find somebody else.
All right, beautiful. Thank you guys so much. So we are going to open it up for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box while we wait for those questions to come in. I just wanted to ask our panelists if you guys have any advice or any words of wisdom or stories perhaps that you might want to tell in relation to our topic.
This is a small thing, but I remember you'll have the option to not see the letter or to have the letter kind of invisible to you, which I did for all my letters, and I recommend that you do also. But one of my letter writers just sent me the letter he wrote for me kind of casually. And if they do that, definitely review it just because that's a good a good opportunity. He actually, it was a great letter, but he spelled my last name like, I don't blame him for this, but very wrong
Oh,
in
no.
every single instance. So I just asked him to kind of change it and review it, and I was very, grateful, of course. And he did, and I think that's just a little thing. But if they give you the opportunity to look at your letter and it not related to like Interfolio or the AMC kind of formal portal, then review it and provide feedback if you'd like.
Awesome. Do you have anything, Parth?
No, and I think we were, I definitely think I've had one letter writer send it to you sort of as preemptively just to take a look at it. And the other scenario that I've heard happening that hasn't happened to me, but is sometimes they'll just letter writers will ask you to write the letter. It's not preferred, but that's just a general thing that it does happen at times, and you'll send it to them and they'll revise it based on whatever additions they'd like to make. Is just the only thing I would say in that is it's hard to make statements about yourself. So you really want to focus on your accomplishments and think back to those core competencies. And you want to highlight areas that might not have been addressed in your other letters. So really touch on core competencies that other letter writers might not have done. And don't be afraid to brag because that's what the letter recommendation is for. And then the letter writer will make adjustments. It's not common, but it's also not an uncommon occurrence that happens.
All right. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing your stories. We have a couple of questions in. So actually to touch on that Parth you already had. So what should they do if their letter writer asks that they write their own letter of recommendation? I'm not sure if you have anything to add to this, Gio, or if you've had any experiences where you've had to write your own letter of recommendation.
I've never been asked, but I've reviewed like friends' letters that they wrote for themselves. And that would be my recommendation. Kind of treat it like another shot at the personal statement, Um, don't make it so grandiose that it's clear that you wrote it for yourself. But and also take a look at the letter writer's advice, which you should do anyway, honestly. But especially if you're writing your own letter.
Amazing. All right. Do you have anything else to add to this, Parth? I know you just talked about it a little bit.
No.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next question. When you provide documents to your letter writer, you'd want to include a brag sheet in there, likely. So what should be on their brag sheet? Yeah, that's the end of that question.
Sure. So it really depends. I think just thinking back to those core competencies and areas that you think might not have been addressed, that you think are really important for this specific letter writer to hit on. So accomplishments that you might have had in this person's class or at work, whoever this person might be, and then just other little things about that they might not have noticed in that situation. So for like, if you're trying to hit on teamwork in a class, the professor may not know about every specific instance on a group project, like outside of the class setting. So don't be afraid to brag about yourself and say like, oh, we worked on this project together. We were able to sort of delegate these tasks or work on these, and we split it this way. Really, just you want as specific as instances as you can to really show a personal nature to those. So really, you want to think about the competencies and what you like that letter writer to get across in their letter.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add to that, Gio?
No,
All
I
right.
don't think so.
To add to that question, would you guys recommend creating a different brag sheet for each professor or each letter writer?
To be honest, I did not include brag sheets to my letter writers, but from what it sounds like, then yeah, yes, if it's a little bit more of a specific to that relationship or that professor's course or that research, PI's like project, then yeah, I think that it would be appropriate to kind of tailor it even more.
Awesome. All right. We have another question. What would you recommend that I do if I don't have any strong relationships with any of my professors? Who should I ask in that case?
Um, if that's truly the case, I would look to extracurricular advisors. Although I will say that two professors, or at least one professor, might be required in one way or another at most schools. Even if they don't display it, they might essentially require it. But I would start making those relationships as soon as possible. Even in your junior year, you can, really just spend some time in office hours would be my recommendation.
Do you have anything to add to that, Parth?
Yeah, it's just I think it's hard to, especially if you're thinking about applying directly out of undergrad or really soon afterwards. It's I don't think there's an alternative to not having an academic letter if you're not a couple of years outside of school. So I think Giovanni hit on it. You just have to sort of put yourself out there, office hours, joining a research project that you might be interested in, or just participate a little bit more in class. You really want to try to make sure the professor notices you and try to develop that relationship as early as you can.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I think we'll hit on our last question here. Actually, two more questions. This question is, how long should my letter of recommendation be?
Again, I think this is only really an issue or a question if you're right, if this is a letter that you're writing, I would make it about a page long, single spaced, like kind of similar to a personal statement, maybe a little bit longer than that, but that's kind of roughly what I would make it.
All right. Awesome. And then the last one is, if you can send, like if there's no limit on the number of letters that you can send, where ideally would you cap it? How many letters should they send?
The most I've ever, I think, for my undergrad, we had to submit 5 letters, and then a committee letter on top of that. So I think 5 to 6 is probably the most that I have heard of. I don't think I've heard of anything more.
Gio, do you have anything to add or any
I agree.
thoughts?
I agree. Even if you're able to add more letters per certain school, they're kind of only going to read like the certain amount that they require or want to read.
All
So
right.
don't send like all your letters to all the schools.
Okay.
Kind of do some homework and see what they require.
All right. That wraps up this webinar. Thank you, Gio and Parth, for being here with us. And thank you for joining us this evening. We will be sending an email with the recorded webinar out in a couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. If you guys have any other specific questions, feel free to send us an email or reach out to us or book a free consultation. So that is it for this evening. Have a great night, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.